When the Galactic Council sent their most fearsome delegation to intimidate the newly discovered human species, they expected another primitive civilization to bow before their technological might. What they found instead was a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of warfare, survival, and turning impossible odds into victory. The Council had conquered 1,000 worlds with fear and superior firepower, but they had never encountered a species that looked at their massive warships and asked, "Is that all you've got?" They had never faced beings who considered extinction-level threats as Tuesday morning challenges. And they certainly had never met creatures who responded to ultimatums with laughter and the simple phrase, "Come and take it." The universe was about to learn why humans had clawed their way to the top of their planet's food chain, and why the phrase, "Hold my beer," and "Watch this," was about to become the most terrifying combination of words in galactic history. What follows is the story of humanity's first contact with the Galactic Council, and how the Predators learned they had stumbled into the territory of apex predators. The massive shadow that fell across Earth's moon wasn't natural. Commander Sarah Chun knew this even before the alerts started screaming across every monitoring station from Luna Base to the International Space Station. The object was geometric, deliberate, and absolutely enormous. At 12 kilometers long and 4 kilometers wide, it dwarfed humanity's largest space stations like a whale next to a minnow. "Ma'am, we're receiving a transmission," Lieutenant Torres announced from his station, his voice tight with barely controlled tension. "It's coming from the object, and it's being broadcast simultaneously to every major government, military installation, and communication hub on Earth and in orbit." Sarah moved to the communications console, her 30 years of military experience keeping her movements steady despite the unprecedented nature of what they were witnessing. Through the observation deck's reinforced windows, the alien vessel dominated the view, its hull appearing to be made of some dark, metallic material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Put it through," she ordered. The voice that filled the command center was deep, resonant, and carried an unmistakable tone of authority mixed with condescension. When the translation software finished processing the alien language, the words that came through made every person in the room stiffen. "Primitive inhabitants of the third planet of this system, you have been observed and evaluated. I am High Counselor Vextar of the Galactic Council, speaking for the collective authority of 437 civilized worlds. Your species has demonstrated sufficient technological development to warrant acknowledgement, but insufficient wisdom to be granted autonomy." Sarah felt her jaw clench. The tone was familiar to any military officer. It was the voice of someone accustomed to absolute obedience, someone who had never been told no in any meaningful way. "You will cease all current military development immediately. Your nuclear weapons will be dismantled under our supervision. Your spacefaring capabilities will be restricted to this system until such time as you demonstrate proper compliance with Galactic Council directives. Representatives from your major political divisions will report to designated coordinates for further instruction within 72 of your hours." The transmission paused, and Sarah could practically hear the smug satisfaction in the alien's next words. "Do not consider resistance. The Galactic Council has brought order to 1,000 worlds, many of which possessed greater military capabilities than your own. We have studied your history, your wars, your primitive attempts at conquest. You are, by galactic standards, unremarkable. Compliance will ensure your continued existence. Defiance will result in sanctions ranging from technological restrictions to, if necessary, complete planetary sterilization." The transmission ended with a tone that suggested the matter was settled, as if they had just informed Earth of a new tax policy rather than demanded complete surrender. For several long moments, the command center was silent except for the hum of life support systems and the quiet beeping of monitoring equipment. Then, Lieutenant Torres cleared his throat nervously. "Ma'am, we're receiving priority communications from, well, everywhere. The Pentagon, NATO Command, the UN Security Council, Moscow, Beijing, New Delhi, Tel Aviv, Tokyo, Everyone wants to know what our response is going to be. Sarah turned to look back out at the alien vessel, noting how its position allowed it to target both Earth and the Moon simultaneously. It was a classic intimidation tactic, showing capability while demanding submission. She had seen similar strategies employed by various Earth militaries throughout history. The difference was that those militaries had been dealing with other humans. Give me a direct line to General Morrison at NORAD, Admiral Hayes at Strategic Command, and whoever's running the show at the Space Command headquarters, she ordered. Also patch in the directors of the European Space Agency, Roscosmos, and the China National Space Administration. If these aliens want to talk to our major political divisions, they're going to get more than they bargained for. As her communications officer worked to establish the connections, Sarah found herself thinking about the aliens' words. Unremarkable, primitive, cease military development. She had heard similar demands before, usually from nations or organizations that fundamentally misunderstood what they were dealing with. The first video link came online, showing General Morrison's weathered face in split screen with Admiral Hayes. Both men looked grim but alert, the kind of expression they wore when facing a crisis that required careful thinking rather than immediate action. Commander Chin, General Morrison's voice crackled through the secure channel. I assume you've been monitoring the situation from Luna Base. What's your assessment? Sir, based on the vessel's positioning and the content of their transmission, I believe we're dealing with a classic intimidation strategy. They're demonstrating superior technology while demanding immediate capitulation, presumably based on the assumption that technological superiority equals tactical superiority. Admiral Hayes leaned forward in his video feed. Commander, are you suggesting these aliens are making a strategic error? Sarah looked back out at the massive vessel. Sir, I'm suggesting that any species that achieves interstellar flight capabilities might have advantages in technology, but that doesn't necessarily translate to understanding of warfare, particularly asymmetric warfare. They've studied our history, but they've interpreted it through their own cultural lens. The other links came online in rapid succession. Within minutes, Sarah was looking at a collection of military leaders, space agency directors, and senior government officials from across the globe. Despite the obvious tensions between some of these nations, everyone seemed to understand that this was bigger than Earth politics. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah began, I think we need to consider the possibility that these aliens have made the same mistake that overconfident military forces have been making throughout human history. They've confused technological superiority with invincibility. Dr. Elena Vasquez, director of the European Space Agency, spoke up from her feed. Commander, are you seriously suggesting we consider resistance against a species capable of interstellar travel? The technological gap between us must be enormous. Dr. Vasquez, with respect, technological gaps can be overcome through creative application of existing resources and understanding of the tactical situation. The question isn't whether they have better technology. Clearly they do. The question is whether they understand what they're actually threatening. General Liu Wei from the Chinese military contributed his perspective. The aliens mentioned studying our history and wars. But history written by whom? And which wars? If they've been observing us from a distance, they might have fundamental misunderstandings about human nature and human conflict. Sarah nodded, feeling a growing sense of clarity about the situation. Exactly. They see our wars as evidence of primitiveness, but they're missing the fact that we've spent our entire evolutionary history competing against other intelligent, adaptable, creative species, each other. Every conflict we've fought has made us better at warfare, more creative with limited resources, more capable of adaptation under extreme pressure. Admiral Hayes was studying something off-screen. Commander, I'm looking at the preliminary analysis of their vessel from our tracking stations. It's impressive, but it's also methodical. The design suggests they prioritize efficiency and intimidation over maneuverability or defensive redundancy. That's consistent with what I'm seeing here, Sarah confirmed. The positioning is tactically sound for intimidation, but it assumes we won't respond with anything they can't easily counter. They're treating this like they're informing us of new building codes, not threatening a species that has weaponized everything from pointy sticks to nuclear fusion. Dr. Vasquez looked troubled, but surely they must have anticipated some form of resistance. Interstellar civilizations don't survive by being completely naive about warfare. Dr. Vasquez, I think that's exactly the point, Sarah replied. They've probably dealt with resistance before, but resistance from species that developed in isolation, species that fought only themselves or their local environment. They've never dealt with a species that spent millennia fighting other intelligent, tool-using, creative species across every possible type of terrain and tactical situation. General Morrison leaned back in his chair, a slight smile crossing his weathered features. Commander, are you suggesting that our main advantage is that we're more practiced at being bastards than they are? Sarah couldn't help but grin. Sir, I'm suggesting that any species that's used to easy victories through technological intimidation might not be prepared for opponents who consider impossible odds to be a starting point rather than a deterrent. The conversation continued for another hour, with more officials joining from various nations and military commands. Despite the obvious complexity of coordinating a global response, Sarah was struck by how quickly the various Earth factions seemed to be reaching consensus. The alien threat wasn't just unifying humanity, it was crystallizing something that had always been true but rarely acknowledged. When the preliminary planning session ended, Sarah remained at the observation deck, watching the alien vessel. Lieutenant Torres approached with a fresh cup of coffee and a data tablet. Ma'am, we've been monitoring communications traffic between Earth and the various military commands. The response is, well, it's not what the aliens probably expected. Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully. Oh, rather than panic or immediate compliance discussions, we're seeing massive upticks in technical consultations between defense contractors, rapid deployment authorizations for experimental weapons systems, and emergency collaboration protocols between military research divisions that normally don't share coffee recipes, let alone tactical intelligence. Sarah nodded slowly. Lieutenant, do you know what the most dangerous phrase in the English language is? Torres looked puzzled. Mom, that's impossible, because whenever humans hear those words, our immediate response isn't to accept the limitation. It's to figure out how to make the impossible happen anyway. She gestured toward the alien ship. These aliens just told humanity that resistance is impossible. They have no idea what they've just triggered. As if to punctuate her point, a new communication came through from Earth. This time it was from an unexpected source. Dr. James Mackenzie, director of CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research. Commander Chun, I've been reviewing the alien transmission with my team, particularly their demand that we cease military development. I thought you should know that we've just received emergency funding authorization from 17 different governments to begin immediate development of what we're calling applied exotic physics research for defensive applications. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Dr. Mackenzie, how exactly does one weaponize a particle accelerator? The physicist's grin was visible even across the video link. Commander, give us 72 hours, and we'll show you. The aliens want to see our military capabilities. They're about to learn that humans don't just weaponize military equipment. We weaponize physics itself. As the transmission ended, Sarah found herself thinking about the alien High Counselor's words. Unremarkable, primitive, compliance will ensure your continued existence. She looked out at the massive alien vessel, then down at the small blue planet below. Somewhere down there, millions of humans were probably having the same realization she was having, that these aliens had made the classic mistake of assuming that because they hadn't met serious resistance before, they never would. Lieutenant, she called out, get me a channel to Admiral Hayes. I think it's time we started planning humanity's response to this ultimatum. Torres nodded and moved to his console. What should I tell him about the nature of our response, ma'am? Sarah smiled, and for the first time since the alien vessel had appeared, she felt genuinely confident about humanity's chances. Tell them we're going to do what humans have always done when faced with impossible odds and superior enemies. We're going to win. The alien vessel continued its silent vigil, its makers confident that they had successfully intimidated another primitive species into submission. They had no way of knowing that down on the planet's surface, humanity was doing what it had always done best, turning every available resource into a weapon and every tactical disadvantage into an opportunity for creative mayhem. The 72-hour countdown had begun, but it wasn't counting down to humanity's surrender. It was counting down to the moment when the Galactic Council would learn the difference between technological superiority and tactical supremacy and discover why the phrase "never underestimate human creativity in the face of certain death" was about to become their new nightmare. 68 hours after the Galactic Council's ultimatum, the alien vessel still hung in space like a dark monument to inevitable conquest. High Counselor Vextar reviewed the monitoring reports with satisfaction. The primitive humans were behaving exactly as predicted. Their communications networks buzzed with activity. Their leaders gathered in emergency sessions, and their military forces had assumed defensive positions around their major population centers. Status report. He commanded his aide, a smaller reptilian creature whose species had been among the first to surrender to Council authority millennia ago. High Counselor, human compliance efforts appear to be proceeding normally. We detect significant increases in communications between their governmental divisions, which typically indicates preparation for surrender negotiations. Their primitive weapons systems remain in defensive configurations, with no signs of aggressive posturing. Vextar noted approvingly. Excellent. And their space-based installations? The lunar facility and orbital stations show increased activity, but nothing beyond expected levels for a species attempting to coordinate surrender terms. Their largest space installation continues broadcasting standard communications protocols. What the aliens didn't realize was that these standard communications protocols represented the largest coordinated military planning effort in human history. Commander Sarah Chan stood in Luna Base's expanded command center, now crowded with additional personnel and equipment that had been shuttled up from Earth on every available transport. The room hummed with activity as military planners, scientists, engineers, and tacticians worked around the clock. Status report, Sarah called out, echoing the alien commander's words unknowingly. Ma'am, Captain Rodriguez responded from the weapons coordination station. Project Slingshot is ready for implementation. Dr. McKenzie's team at CERN has successfully tested their exotic matter acceleration system. They're calling it the Physics Violation Protocol. Sarah couldn't help but smile at the name. And the conventional forces? Ma'am, every stealth submarine in the Pacific Fleet has been repositioned. The Russians have moved their newest nuclear subs into optimal firing positions. The Chinese have deployed their hypersonic delivery systems, and the Europeans have something they're calling gravitational anomaly generators ready for activation. Lieutenant Torres looked up from his communications console. Commander, we're receiving final confirmations from the surface. Operation Coordinated Chaos is ready to commence in 4 hours. All participating nations confirm ready status. Sarah walked to the observation deck, looking out at the alien vessel. Over the past 3 days, humanity had accomplished something unprecedented in its history. Every major military power on Earth had not only agreed to work together, but had shared their most advanced and classified weapons technology in the common cause of telling the aliens exactly where they could put their ultimatum. Dr. Rebecca Walsh, the theoretical physicist who had been rushed up from MIT, approached with a data tablet. I've been analyzing the alien ship's energy signatures with the CERN team. We think we've identified a fundamental flaw in their defensive strategy. Oh, Dr. Walsh pulled up a holographic display showing the alien vessel's energy patterns. They're using what appears to be a standard deflector shield system, highly effective against conventional energy weapons and kinetic projectiles. But it's designed to deflect attacks coming from predictable vectors. Their shield geometry assumes attackers will approach from standard tactical positions. Sarah studied the display, and humans don't attack from standard tactical positions. Exactly. Their shields are optimized for threats they've encountered before, other species that fight like they do. But we've spent our entire military history learning to attack from unexpected angles, using unconventional weapons, and exploiting weaknesses that shouldn't theoretically exist. Another voice joined the conversation. Commander Chun, this is Dr. Mackenzie from CERN. The physicist's voice came through the communication system with barely contained excitement. We've made an interesting discovery about their propulsion system. Go ahead, Doctor. We've been analyzing the gravitational anomalies around their ship, and we think their faster-than-light capability depends on maintaining a stable space-time distortion field. The good news is that we think we could destabilize it. The even better news is that we can do it using modified versions of our particle accelerator technology. Sarah felt a familiar sensation, the moment when impossible odds started looking like interesting challenges. How modified? Well, we've essentially turned the Large Hadron Collider into a space-time disruption cannon. We're calling it the Reality Adjustment Tool. We can fire precisely controlled bursts of exotic particles that should interfere with their FTL field generation. From another station, Major Williams called out, "Commander, we're receiving final positioning reports from our kinetic weapons platforms. The mass driver network is fully operational and targeted." Sarah nodded. The mass driver network was humanity's latest innovation, a collection of electromagnetic accelerators positioned on asteroids, space stations, and hidden installations throughout the solar system. Each one could accelerate small projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. Individually, they were impressive but not overwhelming. Coordinated together, they could deliver simultaneous kinetic strikes from dozens of different vectors. What about our diplomatic response? Sarah asked. Lieutenant Torres smiled. Ma'am, Ambassador Harrison has prepared humanity's official reply to the Galactic Council's ultimatum. Would you like to review it before transmission? Sarah accepted the datapad and read through the message. Her smile grew wider with each paragraph. Lieutenant, who wrote this? Ma'am, it was a collaborative effort. Input from diplomatic corps, military leadership, and about 50,000 internet users who submitted suggestions through various government websites. The message was perfect, polite, professional, and absolutely uncompromising. It thanked the Galactic Council for their interest in Earth development, respectfully declined their generous offer of subjugation, and invited them to enjoy their visit to the solar system while suggesting they might want to keep their departure route clear. Send it, Sarah ordered. Aboard the alien vessel, High Counselor Vextar received humanity's response with something approaching disbelief. In 400 years of galactic expansion, no species had ever responded to a council ultimatum with what could only be described as polite defiance mixed with apparent amusement. Abe Kestow ran a secondary analysis of human military capabilities. These primitives appear to be suffering from some form of collective delusion regarding their chances of successful resistance. High Counselor, our scans continue to show that human military technology remains within expected parameters for their development level. Nuclear weapons, primitive energy systems, basic space flight capability. Nothing that should pose any threat to Council superiority. Vextar studied the human response again. There was something in the tone that reminded him of historical record from species that had caused the Council significant difficulty before ultimately being pacified. But those species had possessed technology much more advanced than humanity's current capabilities. Tactical analysis? High Counselor, human forces remain in defensive positions. However, we are detecting unusual energy signatures from various installations around their planet. Nothing immediately threatening, but some configurations we haven't seen before. Examples: their largest particle physics installation appears to be running at maximum capacity, but we cannot determine the purpose. Several space installations are broadcasting gravitational anomalies that don't match any known technology. and we're detecting massive coordinated movements of their submarine forces, though the tactical purpose is unclear. Vextar Frulvnid. In his experience, primitive species typically responded to council ultimatums in one of two ways: immediate surrender or desperate, uncoordinated attacks using their most powerful weapons. Humans appeared to be preparing for something else entirely. Time remaining on ultimatum: 3 hours, 47 minutes. High Counselor. Very well. Prepare to broadcast the standard non-compliance response. Perhaps a demonstration of our superior firepower will restore their rationality. Back on Luna Base, Sarah Chun watched the countdown timer reach the 3-hour mark. Around her, the command center had transformed into something resembling a three-dimensional chess game designed by someone with a profound understanding of physics and a complete disregard for conventional military thinking. Final systems check, she announced. Mass driver network reports ready. 43 kinetic platforms online and targeted. CERN reports the reality adjustment tool is charged and ready for reality adjustment. Stealth submarine network confirms positioning. 96 nuclear submarines ready for coordinated launch. Gravitational anomaly generators report ready status. Space-based experimental weapons platforms confirm ready status. Orbital kinetic bombardment systems ready. Lunar mass driver reports ready. Sarah took a deep breath. Humanity was about to do something unprecedented: coordinate the simultaneous deployment of conventional weapons, experimental technology, and theoretical physics in a single coordinated assault designed by every major military power on Earth working together. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced to the command center, and by extension to every connected military facility on Earth and in space, for the first time in human history, our species is about to speak with one voice. And that voice is saying go to hell in every language we know, using every weapon we can build from every angle we can manage. The countdown timer hit 2 hours. High Counselor Vextar decided to accelerate the timeline. Commence intimidation démonstration. Target one of their smaller space installations. Nothing critical, just enough to demonstrate our serious intentions. The alien vessel's main weapon array began charging, energy readings spiking as the massive ship prepared to deliver a precisely calibrated demonstration of Council firepower. It was a technique that had worked on every previous species they had encountered. High Counselor, Aide Kestal announced, human response patterns are unusual. Explain. Rather than showing increased panic or surrender signals, we're detecting what appears to be amusement. Their communication networks show patterns consistent with shared anticipation rather than fear. Vextar studied his displays. The energy readings from human installations continued to climb. Whatever they were preparing, it was significantly more complex than any primitive species should have been capable of coordinating. Sir, the tactical officer announced, we're detecting massive coordinated activity across their entire planet. Energy spikes from multiple continents, gravitational anomalies increasing in strength, and what appears to be, sir, I'm not sure how to classify these readings. Elaborate. High Counselor, they appear to be generating localized distortions in space-time itself, at multiple locations, simultaneously. For the first time since arriving in this system, Vextar felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of galactic conquest: uncertainty. Weapons status? Intimidation demonstration ready to fire. High Counselor. Target acquired? Yes, sir. One of their smaller orbital installations. Fire. The beam that lanced out from the alien vessel was precisely calibrated to destroy the target while demonstrating overwhelming force. It should have been the moment when human resistance crumbled in the face of superior technology. Instead, it became a moment when the Galactic Council learned that humans had spent the last 72 hours turning their entire solar system into the largest, most complex, most thoroughly integrated weapons platform in the galaxy. The alien beam struck Luna Base's outer defensive shell, a shield system that shouldn't have existed, built from theories that shouldn't have worked, powered by technology that definitely shouldn't have been possible to construct in 72 hours. The shield held. And then, simultaneously, from 43 different locations throughout the solar system, humanity fired back. Not with one weapon, or even one type of weapon, but with everything they could build, steal, modify, or invent, all at the same time, all targeted at the same alien vessel, all designed to arrive at precisely the same moment from every possible angle. High Counselor Vextar had exactly enough time to realize that humans hadn't spent 72 hours preparing to surrender. They had spent 72 hours preparing to teach the Galactic Council why apex predators didn't give up their territory without a fight. The first indication that the Galactic Council had gravely miscalculated came when their demonstration beam struck Luna Base's shield and simply stopped. Not deflected, not absorbed, but stopped, as if it had encountered something that politely but firmly disagreed with its existence. "What?" High Counselor Vextar began, but his question was answered by the tactical display exploding into a constellation of incoming threats. 43 kinetic projectiles, each traveling at roughly 12% of light speed, converged on the Council vessel for vectors that spanned three-dimensional space in patterns that shouldn't have been possible to coordinate. But that was just the opening move. The second wave consisted of something the Council's sensors couldn't properly classify. Exotic matter streams fired from modified particle accelerators that bent space-time around them, creating pockets of distorted reality that made conventional defensive calculations meaningless. Dr. Mackenzie's reality adjustment tool was working exactly as designed, turning the fundamental forces of physics into weapons. The third wave was more conventional, but no less devastating. 96 nuclear submarines had simultaneously launched their entire arsenals, but these weren't standard ballistic missiles. Human engineers had spent 72 hours modifying every available nuclear weapon with experimental propulsion systems, exotic matter warheads, and guidance systems that use gravitational anomalies to navigate through space. But it was the fourth wave that truly demonstrated humanity's creative approach to warfare. The gravitational anomaly generators weren't weapons in any conventional sense. They were devices that created localized distortions in gravity itself. Instead of firing projectiles at the alien vessel, they were firing space-time. High Counselor Vextar watched his tactical display struggle to process threats that operated according to physics his species had never weaponized. Defensive systems, maximum power. High Counselor, our shields are... The tactical officer's report was cut off as the first kinetic projectiles arrived. The Council vessel's shields had been designed to deflect attacks from predictable vectors using known physics. They performed admirably against 38 of the incoming projectiles, deflecting them with precisely calculated energy distributions that sent the kinetic weapons spinning harmlessly away into space. The remaining 5 projectiles have been fired from locations that created attack vectors the shield geometry couldn't properly address. 1 from directly above the ship's orientation, 2 from angles that approach through the ship's own gravitational shadow, and 2 more that use the moon's gravity well to curve their approach in ways that bypass the shield's focal points entirely. More critically, these weren't simple metal projectiles. Human engineers had created kinetic weapons that incorporated exotic matter cores, designed to destabilize energy shields on impact. When they struck the Council vessel, they didn't just deliver kinetic energy, they delivered holes in the fundamental forces holding the shields together. Shield integrity at 73% and falling, the tactical officer reported as alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Return fire. All weapons. The Council vessel's response was immediate and overwhelming. Energy beams lanced out in multiple directions, targeting the sources of the kinetic attack with precision guided by sensors that had successfully tracked and eliminated threats across dozens of star systems. Every beam found its target. Every target was destroyed. Unfortunately for the Council, the targets they destroyed were decoys. "Sir," Aide Kestal announced with growing alarm, "the installations we just eliminated appear to have been unmanned automated platforms broadcasting false signatures. The actual source locations were Sir, the humans positioned the real weapons platforms using their destroyed installations as decoys. Vextar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Using decoys wasn't unusual. Many species employed misdirection in warfare. But humans had apparently built their entire attack strategy around the assumption that the Council would successfully destroy their initial targets. Second wave incoming, the tactical officer announced. The exotic matter streams arrived like spears of twisted reality, each one carrying enough distorted space-time to disrupt energy shields from directions that didn't technically exist. Dr. Mackenzie's team at CERN had essentially weaponized the concept of impossible, creating attacks that bypass conventional defenses by refusing to follow conventional physics. Shield integrity at 41%, the tactical officer reported. Sir, we're experiencing cascade failures in the port deflector array. These attacks are somehow causing our own shield generators to work against each other. Vextar studied the tactical display, trying to understand what he was seeing. How is that possible? High Counselor, the humans appear to have weaponized quantum uncertainty itself. Their exotic matter weapons aren't just carrying energy, they're carrying localized regions where the fundamental constants of physics have been adjusted. The third wave struck before Vextar could fully process this information. The nuclear missiles that humanity had launched weren't following ballistic trajectories. They were navigating through space using gravity manipulation technology that allowed them to change direction without conventional propulsion. Worse, they were coordinating with each other, adjusting their approach vectors in real time to maintain optimal attack patterns even as the Council vessel maneuvered defensively. Sir, these missiles are using gravitational anomalies to communicate with each other. They're not just individually guided, they're operating as a coordinated swarm intelligence. Vextar watched in growing disbelief as the human missiles began executing attack patterns that resembled nothing so much as a pack hunt. Groups of missiles would approach from one vector, drawing defensive fire, while other groups used the distraction to position themselves for more effective strikes. When the Council's defensive systems adapted to counter one pattern, the missiles would seamlessly shift to another approach entirely. Defensive fire is achieving significant kills, the weapons officer reported. But, sir, the human missiles are learning. Each one we destroy provides tactical data to the remaining units. Shield integrity at 18%, the tactical officer added. Sir, I'm detecting massive energy buildups from multiple human installations. I think they're preparing for a fourth wave attack. That was when the gravitational weapons fired. High Counselor Vextar had conquered civilizations that wielded energy beyond his species' understanding. He had defeated fleets that outnumbered his own by factors of 10. He had negotiated the surrender of beings whose technology made the Council's achievements look primitive. But he had never faced an enemy that weaponized gravity itself. The human gravitational anomaly generators didn't fire projectiles. They fired alterations to the fundamental structure of space-time. Localized regions where gravity pointed in directions it shouldn't, where the normal relationship between mass and gravitational attraction was replaced by human-designed equations that prioritized military effectiveness over natural law. Sir, we're experiencing gravitational shear across the hull. The humans are somehow creating gravity wells that pull in different directions simultaneously. The Council vessel, designed to operate in the predictable gravitational environment of normal space, found itself trying to maintain structural integrity while being pulled apart by forces that originated from multiple locations and operated according to physics that had been modified for maximum destructive effect. Emergency maneuvers. Vextar commanded. Get us out of their weapons range. Sir, we cannot determine their weapons range. The gravitational attacks appear to be... Sir, they're using our own mass against us. The larger our ship, the more effective their weapons become. That was when Vextar realized the true scope of humanity's tactical thinking. Every advantage the Council possessed, their superior technology, their massive vessel, their overwhelming firepower, had been transformed by human creativity into a liability. Communications, he barked. Contact the human leadership immediately. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human lunar installation. Commander Sarah Chen's voice came through the Council's communication system with the tone of someone who was enjoying herself far more than should have been possible while engaged in mortal combat. High Counselor Vextar, this is Commander Chun of Luna Base. Are you ready to discuss terms? Vextar stared at the tactical display, watching his shields fail under attacks that violated several fundamental principles of warfare. Terms? You dare speak of terms while engaging in unprovoked assault. High Counselor, you fired first. We're simply responding with proportional force. Would you prefer we escalate to our more exotic weapon systems? More exotic? What could possibly be more exotic than weaponized gravity? Well, we've been experimenting with temporal displacement fields, antimatter cascades, and something our physicists are calling aggressive quantum tunneling. Plus, our biological warfare specialists have developed some fascinating applications of engineered viruses that attack mechanical systems. But we thought we'd start with the conventional approaches first. Vextar felt something he had never experienced in 4 centuries of galactic conquest. The absolute certainty that he was outmatched not by superior technology, but by superior tactical thinking. What do you want? High Counselor, we want exactly what we said in our diplomatic response. We want you to leave our system. Carry word back to your Galactic Council that humanity declines your generous offer of subjugation, and we suggest you develop more respectful approaches to future first contact situations. And if we refuse, then we'll demonstrate why humans spent millions of years clawing their way to the top of their planet's food chain, and why we consider impossible odds to be a starting point rather than a deterrent. Vextar looked around his command center, noting the damage indicators, the failing systems, and the growing fear on the faces of his crew. The humans had accomplished something unprecedented. They had taken a species with inferior technology and superior tactical thinking and used it to defeat vastly superior technology operated by inferior tactical thinking. Sir, the tactical officer announced, sensors indicate the humans have additional weapons platforms coming online. I'm detecting energy signatures consistent with, sir, I don't know how to classify what I'm detecting. Commander Chen's voice came through the communication system again, this time with a slight hint of impatience. High Counselor, our biological warfare specialists are particularly eager to test their new anti-mechanical viruses. Apparently, they've created biological organisms that eat advanced alloys and reproduce by consuming electronic systems. Would you like a demonstration? Vextar closed his eyes and realized that the Galactic Council had just learned the most important lesson in the universe. Never threaten a species that has spent its entire evolutionary history turning everything around them into weapons. Commander Chun, he said slowly, perhaps we should discuss this situation more diplomatically. Excellent choice, High Counselor. But first, I think your council needs to understand exactly what they almost started here. Because that wasn't humanity's full military response. That was just our 72-hour improvisation project. Would you like to see what we can accomplish when we're actually trying? Vextar suddenly understood why so many conquered species had legends about nightmare creatures that struck from the darkness. The humans weren't just militarily effective. They were creative in ways that transformed every possible disadvantage into a tactical opportunity. And they were just getting started. 3 hours after High Counselor Vextar's request for diplomatic discussions, he found himself in the most unprecedented situation of his 4-century military career, sitting across a negotiation table from representatives of a species that had just demonstrated they could treat his flagship like a training exercise for their experimental weapons programs. The meeting was taking place aboard Luna Base, in a conference room that had been hastily constructed for the occasion. The human delegation consisted of Commander Sarah Chun, Ambassador Harrison, Dr. Mackenzie from CERN, and General Morrison. The alien delegation was just Vextar and his aide, Kestal, both of whom looked like they were attending their own funeral. High Counselor, Ambassador Harrison began with the kind of diplomatic politeness that managed to sound both respectful and threatening. Before we discuss your departure from our system, We thought you might be interested in understanding exactly what happened out there. Vextar nodded slowly. Professional curiosity warred with the growing certainty that whatever he was about to learn would make the situation significantly worse. Dr. Mackenzie activated a holographic display showing the tactical engagement from multiple angles. High Counselor, what you experienced was approximately 15% of humanity's current military capability. The weapons systems we deployed were developed in 72 hours using existing technology modified for space warfare. 15%, Vextar repeated numbly. Actually, General Morrison interjected, that's 15% of our improvised capability. Our actual military capacity is considerably more comprehensive. Commander Chen leaned forward. High Counselor, you mentioned that the Galactic Council has studied our history. We're curious. Which wars did you observe? Your major conflicts. The two global wars of the 20th century, your regional conflicts, your colonial expansions. Ambassador Harrison interrupted gently. That explains the fundamental misunderstanding. You observed our practice sessions. Vextar blinked slowly. Practice sessions? Dr. Mackenzie pulled up another display showing human military development over time. High Counselor, every war humanity has fought has been against other humans, beings with identical intelligence, identical creativity, and identical capacity for tactical innovation. Every conflict forced us to develop new approaches because our enemies adapted to our previous strategies. Observe, Commander Chan said, as the display shifted to show weapon development timelines. In World War I, we developed chemical weapons. By World War II, we had developed defenses against chemical weapons and moved on to nuclear weapons. During the Cold War, we developed defenses against nuclear weapons and created precision guidance systems. In every case, we were racing against opponents who were just as smart and just as creative as we were. General Morrison smiled grimly. High Counselor, you've spent millennia conquering species that developed in isolation, species that fought only their environment or perhaps one other intelligent species. You've never encountered a species that spent its entire evolutionary history fighting multiple versions of itself. Vextar was beginning to understand the scope of the Council's error. You're saying that every human conflict has been against opponents of equivalent capability? Equivalent or superior, Ambassador Harrison confirmed. High Counselor, do you know what the most devastating military strategy in human history is? Assumption of technological superiority without tactical verification. We've seen it destroy every overconfident military force in our history. The moment any human commander assumes their technology makes them invincible, they lose to smaller, less equipped forces using superior tactical thinking. Dr. Mackenzie activated another display. High Counselor, would you like to see what we developed during the Manhattan Project? The display showed the development of nuclear weapons from initial concept to deployment in under 4 years. Vextar studied the timeline with growing horror. You developed planet-destroying weapons in 4 years. Less than 4 years, Dr. Mackenzie corrected. And that was with 1940s technology. High Counselor, we just spent 72 hours turning our entire solar system into a weapons platform using 21st century technology. Would you like to guess what we could accomplish with a 4-year timeline and proper motivation? Vextar remained silent, but his aide Kestal spoke up nervously. Commander Chun, surely your species recognizes the benefits of joining a galactic civilization? The technological advancement, the cultural exchange, the expanded horizons. Commander Chin smiled. Aide Kestal, humanity is absolutely interested in joining galactic civilization. We're interested in cultural exchange, technological collaboration, and expanded horizons. What we're not interested in is subjugation disguised as invitation. Ambassador Harrison activated a new holographic display. Aide Kestal, this is humanity's proposed alternative to the Galactic Council's original offer. The display showed a comprehensive diplomatic framework that had been developed by Earth's combined diplomatic corps over the previous 3 days. It outlined terms for voluntary participation in galactic civilization technology sharing agreements, cultural exchange programs, and collaborative exploration initiatives. But it also outlined mutual defense pacts, territorial sovereignty guarantees, and enforcement mechanisms that made it clear humanity expected to be treated as equals rather than subjects. High Counselor, Ambassador Harrison continued, humanity offers the Galactic Council a choice. You can treat us as partners in galactic development, with all the benefits that mutual cooperation provides. Or you can treat us as enemies, with all the consequences that human creativity can devise. General Morrison leaned back in his chair. High Counselor, let me make this very simple. If the Galactic Council wants to add human creativity and human tactical thinking to your collective capabilities, we're open to discussion. If you want to try to suppress human creativity and human tactical thinking, you're going to discover why apex predators don't make good prey. Vextar studied the proposal with growing amazement. The humans weren't just offering resistance to Council authority. They were offering to reconstruct the entire relationship between the Council and its member species. This is unprecedented, he admitted. High Counselor, Commander Chen said gently, everything about humanity is unprecedented from your perspective. You've never encountered a species that developed competitive intelligence through millennia of conflict against equivalent opponents. You've never dealt with beings who consider impossible to be a tactical challenge rather than an absolute limitation. And you've never negotiated with creatures who weaponize physics itself when properly motivated. Dr. Mackenzie activated a final display, this one showing theoretical weapon designs that humanity had developed during the brief conflict. Vextar looked at schematics for devices that violated several basic principles of applied physics. High Counselor, these are the weapon systems we didn't use. The temporal displacement cannons, the reality anchor bombs, the entropy reversal fields, and the quantum probability manipulators. We have theoretical designs for weapons that attack the concept of existence itself. Vextar stared at the schematics. These cannot possibly work. High Counselor, you said our gravitational weapons couldn't possibly work either. Human engineers have a complex relationship with impossibility. We tend to take it personally. The alien commander looked around the conference room, noting how every surface contained monitoring equipment that was analyzing his ship, his technology, and probably his biological functions. Even in negotiation, humans were gathering intelligence for future conflicts. What guarantees do we have that humanity won't use these capabilities aggressively? Ambassador Harrison smiled. High Counselor, you have the same guarantee every human military force has relied on throughout history. Mutually assured destruction with a creative, intelligent, and well-armed opponent. If the Galactic Council treats humanity fairly, humanity will respond in kind. If you attempt to subjugate us, we'll demonstrate why apex predators make terrible prey. General Morrison added, plus, High Counselor, we're offering something the Galactic Council has apparently never had before. Genuine allies rather than conquered subjects. Human military creativity applied in support of the Council rather than opposition to it. Vextar considered this. The Galactic Council had been built on technological superiority and fear-based compliance. The idea of incorporating a species that could enhance the Council's capabilities rather than simply submit to them was genuinely novel. And if we refuse these terms? Commander Chen's smile was absolutely terrifying in its friendliness. High Counselor, then you'll return to the Galactic Council and explain that the human species has declined membership in your organization. You'll also explain that Earth is now a sovereign system with defensive capabilities that include weaponized physics, and that any future contact should be conducted through proper diplomatic channels. And if the Council decides to respond with overwhelming force, then you'll explain to them that overwhelming force is a relative concept, and that humans have spent their entire evolutionary history turning superior force against itself through superior tactics. Dr. Mackenzie added cheerfully, plus, High Counselor, we'll have, however, much time you give us to prepare. And, as you've seen, Humans accomplish remarkable things when we're properly motivated. Vextar realized he was facing a situation entirely outside his experience. The Galactic Council had built its authority on the assumption that technological superiority translated to inevitable victory. Humans had just demonstrated that tactical superiority could transform technological inferiority into decisive advantage. "I will need to consult with the Council," he said finally. "Of course," Ambassador Harrison replied. "We'll provide you with complete documentation of our proposal, along with technical specifications for the defensive systems you encountered. We want the Council to make an informed decision. And we'll include some of our theoretical weapon designs," Dr. Mackenzie added helpfully, "just so they understand the full scope of their options." As the meeting concluded and Vextar prepared to return to his ship, Commander Chen walked him to the docking bay. "High Counselor, may I offer some advice for your report to the Council?" Vextar nodded. "Don't let them make the mistake of thinking this was about human aggression. What you witnessed was human defensive creativity. If you think our defensive capabilities are impressive, you really don't want to find out what we're like when we're actually trying to hurt someone." As Vextar's shuttle departed Luna Base, he found himself composing the most difficult report of his career. How do you explain to a galactic civilization built on technological dominance that you've just encountered a species that treats technological inferiority as a starting point for tactical innovation? 6 hours later, the Galactic Council's flagship departed Earth's solar system, carrying word back to the Council that humanity had declined their invitation to subjugation and offered alternative terms for galactic citizenship. What the Council didn't know was that the human response had already been transmitted to every inhabited system within communication range. Dr. Mackenzie's team at CERN had developed a faster-than-light communication system during their weapon improvisation period, and Ambassador Harrison had used it to broadcast humanity's proposal to every species in the local galactic region. Within days, the Galactic Council began receiving communications from dozens of member species asking about the possibility of renegotiating their own relationship with Council authority. Many of these species had been conquered decades or centuries ago and had never had the opportunity to consider alternatives to subjugation. 3 months later, the Galactic Council formally accepted humanity's proposal for partnership rather than subjugation. The agreement established the first truly voluntary galactic civilization, one based on mutual cooperation rather than technological dominance. But the most important change was philosophical. For the first time in galactic history, an interstellar civilization was built on the principle that intelligence and creativity were more valuable than raw technological capability. And at the center of it all was a small blue planet whose inhabitants had looked at impossible odds and asked, "Is that all you've got?" Commander Sarah Chun stood in Luna Base's observation deck, watching the construction of the new diplomatic facility that would serve as humanity's embassy to galactic civilization. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see alien vessels from dozens of species arriving to establish formal relations with Earth. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Torres announced from behind her, "we're receiving a priority communication from Admiral Hayes at Strategic Command." "Go ahead, Lieutenant." "Ma'am, he says to tell you that the biological warfare specialists have just developed a virus that eats dark matter. They want to know if we should classify it as a weapon or a physics experiment." Sarah smiled and turned back to the view of Earth hanging in space below. Somewhere down there, millions of humans were continuing to do what they had always done best, turning everything around them into either tools or weapons, treating impossible challenges as interesting puzzles, and proving that apex predators didn't surrender their territory to anyone. "Tell Admiral Hayes to classify it as both," she said. "After all, we never know when we might need to weaponize the fundamental structure of the universe." The lieutenant's grin was visible in his reflection on the window. Mom. Just another Tuesday in the human space program." And somewhere in the depths of space, High Counselor Vextar was learning that the most dangerous phrase in any language wasn't "we surrender" or "we submit." It was "hold my beer and watch this."